A good life is a life built around fulfilling work, play, relationships, and lifelong learning. Welcome to Good Life Conversations, where we explore the stories and strategies of inspiring everyday people who are striving to create a life of purpose, meaning, and connection. Hi there, welcome to this Good Life Conversation. My name is Jay. I'm your host and the founder of Discover Year, and today's guest is Kris Zawadka. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you.
Kris is a man of many hats in work and in life. And at work, currently, he is the development manager of growth, research and development at Shopify. He's also the co-owner of a company called I'll Help Point of Sale Systems. And he's the chief technology officer at a company you've probably heard of called Escape Manor. So Kris is a computer programmer, and he is very skilled and knowledgeable in technology in general. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, what he does at work and how he came into this career, these careers, I should say. But Kris, like anybody else, we would like to start with hearing about your typical day. So tell us, if you please, what time do you get up? Do you have any morning rituals or habits? How many hours do you tend to work in a day? Do you end at a certain time? How do you wind down? What time do you go to bed?
Well, I'm not much of a morning person, so I typically wake up around 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And typically the first thing I do is just catch up on emails and messages. Shopify is a multi-time zone, multi-country company, so there could be messages coming in overnight. Then I try to do my meetings. I try to bunch them up if possible, just to get those out of the way. And then I set aside focus time to work on whatever's my number one priority for the day or the week. And that focus time is really, really important. I'd say I typically end around 5:30, 6 o'clock, have dinner with the family, and then I'm typically back at the computer doing some follow-up work if I haven't had the chance to hit on all my tasks items for the day. And I'd say I'm a pretty late, like a night owl, so I probably go to bed around 1 or 2 in the morning. I'd say on average, I'm working 8, 9, 10 hours a day, depending.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, you wake up at 8:39. Are you kind of directly to your computer, or do you have any habits or things that you do before
Well,
you jump on that
straight
computer?
to the coffee machine for sure. I make myself a coffee and then I sit down right away and just start going through the messages. There can be quite a lot of activity in between when I shut down and when I turn on. And so I just try to catch up as best as possible. Yeah.
So we've had a lot of mentors, we've done about 30 of these so far. And this is interesting because a lot of our mentors get up early. They've built this habit of waking up early. And it sounds like some of them have changed from being a night owl to getting up early for a variety of reasons. But you're pretty consistent with this kind of, maybe you get up
Mm-hmm.
earlier than you used to, but you bed a little bit later, up a little bit later, coffee, work right away. So there's no meditation for you. There's no walking around the block. There's nothing. You get a coffee and you're at work.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I said, I've been a night owl my whole life. I'm physically incapable of going to bed early. I'll just wake up 2 hours later and be like wide awake. And I've tried to follow shift my cycles, and it doesn't work. And so I've optimized for this. It works for me. I also find that I'm probably the most effective between 10 and 2 in the morning. Maybe it's because it's quiet. Maybe it's because nothing, phones aren't ringing, messages aren't coming in. And I just have this it's almost like my meditation there, those 4 hours of complete silence. I feel like I'm extremely effective in that time frame.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really interesting. So, and you don't find like waking up and getting to work pretty quickly, that doesn't bother you. You enjoy that enough?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, my meditation, my kind of break from work is more into sports and outdoor activities, and I'll typically do those in the evening. I'm not doing those in the morning. And there's just part of me that wants to get up and start getting stuff done. Like I think the quicker I get stuff done, the more I feel like I've accomplished something in the day, and that's motivating for me. So yeah, that's always worked for me.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's important to understand what works for us and to home in on that over time. So you mentioned that you like outdoor activities and sports too. So we didn't hear about that in the day. Does that happen every day? Tell us a little bit about what you do to get those fixes.
I try to play sports 5 or 6 times a week. And so in the winter, it's 5 hockey games a week. In the summer, I split between hockey and golf. I just find going out, hanging out with friends, playing a sport, good exercise. It takes my mind off work. It's a huge social interaction. Like I get to hang out with my friends, which I love. And so that for me is my break from work, my peace, my meditation. Outdoor activities as well, whether it be like going for walks or playing an outdoor sports or go camping or hiking. Any of those things can also like help me just reset and relax.
Something that a lot of our audience members might not know, but I do, is that you did not grow up playing hockey. And
No,
I want to say you were 30, 28 when you
I
started?
was almost 30, 20, 28, 27, 28.
2017, 28. And so we play hockey together. And if someone saw you play hockey today, they would not know probably that you didn't play. So tell us, if you don't mind, while we're talking about some of your hobbies and what you get out of them, why did you decide to decide to start playing hockey when you were almost 30, and how did that go?
It's actually a funny story. I was living in Switzerland and my friends decided to go out and play shinny in Davos, where we have that international competition, that Canada and the Spengler Club and all that. And I hit the ice and I was a complete disaster. And I felt like I let down my country because my Swiss friends were like, you must be a pro NHL player, you're Canadian, and I couldn't skate. And so I was like determined to come back to Canada and just pick it up. But I also grew up loving hockey. It's just my parents couldn't afford to put me into the sport. It was a very expensive sport. And so I played some other, low cost sports. And so it was always kind of a desire. And it was the right time coming back to Canada and just having the time and space to just invest into hockey. And I want to say I obsessed about it. I practiced a lot. I was outdoors. Oftentimes when the kids were gone to bed, I'd be outdoor playing shinny by myself and just practicing. And yeah, I tend to be pretty passionate about improvement, just self-improvement in general. So when I tackle something new, for me, just this idea of just continuously getting better is like a huge reward and a huge gratification. So I tend to just kind of obsess about things that I pick up.
Yeah, I've seen that you get really focused on improvement, and I think that in my experience, engineers often have that common trait. They like to see improvement, right? That's something that's well established in the field of kind of science and engineering, that people are motivated by seeing improvements specifically. Where did that come from for you, do you think?
The engineering mindset for sure. I think you hit the nail on the head. I see this in other engineers as well. We're very analytical, we're very progress oriented, and we do this in how we develop and build applications, and we do this in our personal life very often in our hobbies. And I think that we also tend to break down the sport or the activity that we're doing scientifically and say, like, how do I get better at this? Where do I need to focus? Where are my problem areas, and how do I improve there? So I think that almost in everything in life, I just take this engineering mindset. I deconstruct the problem. I look for the weaknesses and areas of growth, and then I focus there.
Yeah, it's really cool. Um, and I think there's lots to be said. We'll chat perhaps a little bit about failure here too, and that's an important topic for us at Discover Year. And so I think perhaps a lot of people, we didn't mention this yet, but perhaps a lot of people listening might think, oh wow, he's an engineer. That means he must have gone to school for a really long time. And I know that's not the case, but I'd love to explore this idea that you have a high school diploma, and that
Mhm.
was it. You don't have any post-secondary diplomas or degrees. You did attend college briefly. Can you tell us a little bit about that, the fact that you dropped out of college, why that happened, and how you've been successful regardless of that fact?
It's interesting because back in the 90s, the programs at colleges and universities were kind of dated and behind current technologies, current programming languages. And so when I started attending college, all my classes seemed to be irrelevant to what I was passionate about, which was web. And web was, this fledgling technology, and it wasn't quite well adapted and integrated into school curriculums. And so I was learning all this stuff on my own at home and just building things in my basement and building these applications and these websites. And it quickly became apparent that I had a skill set that was unique and that I could leverage immediately. And I didn't feel like attending school for 3 years was going to benefit me, considering that I was interested in web and they were more into legacy systems. Fast forward 5 years after that, they really started incorporating web technologies, and I think it became a bit more relevant. But for me at the time, it was almost completely irrelevant. And listen, every company in the world wanted a website. There was an infinite amount of opportunity. So I was lucky in terms of timing as well. if you fast forward to today, things have changed a lot. The curriculums, the programs are way more relevant to the current technologies. They're a way to fast track yourself into a new domain, a new area of expertise if you don't have prior experience. But there still is that opportunity to just grind it out at home and build things and build a portfolio and start working for smaller companies and establish yourself very quickly. When I'm hiring right now, university is one, or college is kind of one of the things that we look at, but it's not the whole picture, right? Experience trumps education very often in my industry.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to talk about that. You can circle back maybe to this idea of self-taught programming at home. I'd like to hear more about that. But just because you brought it up, and you are a manager at Shopify, and so you do hire engineers, I believe mostly engineers. But regardless of who you're hiring, if you could consider, without the technical skills that you're looking for, obviously you're looking for people to be able to do a certain number of programming, but what kind of attributes are you looking for in the young people beyond the programming skills that they have?
Because we are primarily remote, I think communication and the ability to articulate a problem and your solution is really, really important. And so communication would be at the top. We look for folks that have a really strong work ethic, that are probably doing these things at home, researching new technologies, seeing how it could apply to their current job, and are generally just like interested in the field, in the industry, and where the industry is going. As you may have heard or may know, our industry changes very quickly in 6 to 12 month cycles, new languages, new technology. Just look at how AI took over our industry in the last 6 to 12 months. And so this happens fairly frequently. It's really important to be forward looking. We look for folks that have a high level of focus. There's so much going on that if you have a high work ethic, but your focus is lacking, it could be very wasted. So we look for folks that are highly focused and can identify their top priorities and invest all their energy in that. And of course, we look for kind people. I mean, we have a motto at Shopify: don't hire an asshole. So we look for people that collaborate well, communicate well, that we do these live pairing sessions where we actually work on a problem together. And we look to see that there's like a good give and go, that they can defend their point, but they can have strong opinions that are loosely held and can be convinced, not taking a different approach, and just see how they would work in a day-to-day situation. So those are really helpful to identify folks that collaborate well.
That's great. It's cool to hear that you have like this working session where you try to observe those things in practice. And we won't get into the depths of kind of the interview process for Shopify or other companies, but it's good to hear communication skills, identification of problems, and being able to collaborate on those things, and focus, being some of the main things that you're looking for. Yeah, really interesting. Thank you. Okay, so I'd love to just circle back to this idea of you teaching yourself programming. And obviously, you taught yourself a lot of things since then as well. But how did you start doing this? Where did the motivation come from? And how did you just figure it out? What advice would you share to someone who's also interested in programming?
So I was lucky. My mom went back to university to become a computer engineer when I was quite young. And so we had access to a brand new computer. And again, web technology was becoming quite popular. And so I just started playing around with the computer and programming, and discovered I really had an aptitude for it and a love for it. And then I started building like small games, small websites, and it was just this continuous exploring new technologies, new languages. And I was kind of addicted to the idea of creation and creating things, which is, I think, fundamentally what we do as engineers. And the options I had, right? Like the plethora of ideas and apps and games, or different angles that I could approach this, was just, it allowed me to kind of satiate that creative need I had. And it was, yeah, I just fell in love with it at a young age. And so I just continued doing that up into my teens. I knew quite early that this was something I wanted to pursue.
So it sounds like you were both good at it and interested in it, which we talk about often. That's a really great pairing for people. Sometimes we're good at things that we don't care about as much, but we do them anyways because we're good at them and we get positive feedback about them. And other times we're interested in things and we perhaps don't have a knack for it. But you, retrospectively, you saw clearly that you both enjoyed and were good at this.
Yeah, and I did other jobs when I was a teenager, where I worked in garages and gardening centers. And I quickly realized that sitting down at a computer and creating something from scratch was something that I just enjoyed way more than everything else that I had tried. So just kind of pursued it and made a career out of it.
And how long were you playing around with technology before you started getting paid to do that?
Started really young. I started like, 8, 9, 10. So I wasn't being paid.
Wow.
But I actually started getting small consulting gigs when I was 14, 15. They were not, they were smaller things. But then I started working for Bell Canada when I was 16 I was doing customer support. And that led to me connecting with folks that were starting smaller businesses, digital agencies. And so by the age of 18, I was working professionally in the space.
So you were working professionally, and then it sounds like 18 is around the time most of us go to college. So there was some kind of connection between when you started working full time and went to college. So you didn't talk much about going to college yet, other than the fact that it was kind of outdated. But tell us
Mhm.
a little bit more about how that happened. So you were working full time, you started going to college, and then I know that you had this job offer. So tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about what it was like to be working full time, going to school, and then leaving.
So as I mentioned, through the connections at Bell Canada, a couple of folks like spun out and started a digital agency where they were building websites for local companies in Ottawa, Gatineau area. And I was going to school, I was going to college. I was not super happy with the program I was in, the curriculum, and they were reaching out to me and saying like, "Hey, if college is not interesting to you, like you could come work for us. We could use a coder." And they had seen the stuff I'd built prior, right? Like I actually had a portfolio of work that I'd done. So they made a job offer that was higher than what I was expecting to make post college. So it was one of those things. I actually had the conversation with my parents. I said like, "Hey, am I crazy to take on this opportunity?" And they were in agreement that it was something I shouldn't pass up on, right? And so I took it, and I never looked back. I mean, again, it was such a nascent like area, and there's so much opportunity. Like even if this fell through, there were 1,000 other companies in Ottawa area, Toronto, Montreal that were looking to have a website created. So I didn't feel like it was a huge risk, but it was a little nerve wracking too, right? Like I'm walking away from college and saying like, "Hey, let's start my career now." So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean I think it's I'm sure there are many things you've done since then to continue growing and you know filling out your career too. I know there have been. So we heard that you started doing this around 8 years old and then you continued. I mean, how many hours a day, starting at the age of 8, do you think you spent coding, programming, doing this on the computer?
So we're gonna have to separate how much time I spent gaming, which was a significant part of the day when I was younger. Um, listen, I was spending 10, 15, 20 hours a week just like trying to create a game or trying to create a website or taking existing code and just trying to modify it, see if I could take a game that had the code accessible and say, okay, this monkey's throwing a banana. Can I change the color of the banana? Can I make the banana go further? And just start incrementally making changes to the application. And that's where I developed kind of my sense of um, or started building on my skill on how to make programs and create stuff. And so as I grew older, I spent less time playing video games and more time just creating things. And so by the age 14, 15, programming was a big part of what I was doing at the computer and less the gaming.
Yeah. Did you ever hit a period where you felt like you were doing this so much that we hear about burnout a lot in today's world. Have you ever felt this idea of burning out? You're someone who works a lot. You have, we haven't even talked about the two other parts of your career that you
Mm.
have now, but you do a lot of work, and most people might think, "Woof, how do you not get burnt out?" What do you say to that?
It's funny because I think I've never been burnt out with software engineering, with programming, with creating. That love, that desire to just create stuff has always been there. I think at times I've gotten a little burnt out with a specific project, either because it was taking too long or it was demanding many hours, and maybe there was a problem with the release, which can create a lot of anxiety and fear. And so I think that it's been more project based. As far as like my actual career in software engineering, like I've never really felt burnt out, and it's not ever really felt like work, to be honest. The projects feel like work, but the
Mm,
actual coding itself is, to be honest, I've said this many times, I'd rather be coding than watching a TV show,
that's really
right?
cool.
It's just, and so for me, it's not draining. It doesn't feel like work very often.
I think this is a really important topic, and I appreciate how you articulated that, because people, often young people I meet, will think that working too many hours is the cause of burnout, and it's of course much more complicated than that. And I like the separation that you made here between the nature of the work that you're doing, which is, always generally fulfilling to you, but the emotional things that get tied to projects can be depleting. The way that you're working with other people, or the way the project is not evolving as you thought, those are the kind of the emotional constraints that generally do lead to burnout more than the actual work itself.
The way I've typically framed this is that if you are working more hours than you would typically see because you want to, then that's not going to lead to burnout. If you're working extra hours because you have to, I think that's where you potentially can go down the path of a burnout. So I have a lot of folks on my team that they just work more hours. They love the space, they love what they're doing, and as long as it's their choice, they enjoy it. But the moment we're in a project crunch and we're putting in those hours and you have to stay up and you have to pull an all-nighter, that can burn you out.
Yeah, that's great. We're falling on the idea of autonomy here, and it's been independence, having control of our lives. It's been well documented in the research in psychology that that's a main factor, an influential factor for our well-being, is the degree to which we feel we have control over what we're doing. So I'm really happy that you're bringing that up, because it's not something that young people hear about all the time. It's a bit more nuanced, right, than the typical message.
Absolutely.
So that's cool. So you would do this over watching a show. I mean, I don't know what kind of shows you watch necessarily, but would you do it over playing hockey?
No, I think so. I think having those 5-6 hours a week where, well, probably more than that, 7-8 hours a week where I'm exercising and playing team sports are essential for my well-being. I think just my physical health, obviously, to go out there and just, burn some calories and socialize. I would not replace those hours. They're essential. They're absolutely essential.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'd love to just hear quickly, because again, I think this is a nice segue into, you work a lot of hours, at your main job, which is at Shopify as a manager. Now, you're also co-owner of a company called I'll Help, point of sale systems. And for those that aren't sure, a point of sale is the gadget that we use. It's the computer infrastructure that we use when you tap our card on a machine when we're paying something, when we're out and about. And so you're a co-owner of a company, and then you're also the chief technology officer for Escape Manor, which means you run their back end, their platforms, their payment systems, their websites. That's a very introductory way of saying it. But you do all these things. So how do you go about fitting those extra things into your schedule?
So I think when I first joined Shopify, I had a lot on the go in terms of the startups and my commitments to those two companies. And part of what I had to do when I joined Shopify was to kind of reduce my role in those companies into more an advisory role, because it's just not sustainable for me to work, hundreds and hundreds of hours a week. And so there was kind of like the scaling down process that I went through when joining Shopify. In my advisory role now for both companies, it's really just about looking at the data, looking where there's bugs, giving recommendations to how we can solve particular problems, making sure that the right people are hired to do the day-to-day work. And so yeah, so we have these weekly meetings, we have a conversation, we look at what the problem space is, and I give my recommendations. And so I'd say, like, right now my workload is much better because I'm in this advisory role now. But when I first joined Shopify, it was like really overwhelming as I was scaling down my activities in both those companies.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So you mentioned startups. So you're the co-owner of a company, and you don't work on it as much now, but it sounds like at some point you chose to work for a large, successful company, Shopify, and you've worked for other, TripAdvisor before that, and a few other companies, probably more than a few,
Yeah.
companies as an engineer. So can you tell us a little bit about your decision to join a large company rather than perhaps continue with your own venture?
Yeah, this may resonate with anyone that has done a startup, or maybe not the younger folks, but just folks that have been part of startups in general. Startup life is really difficult. And so when I left TripAdvisor and I had this idea that I need to take a break from working for a large organization and try to build something on my own, which is something I had been thinking about for a number of years, started building out this company. And we primarily operate in the Caribbean. So we're the company was not facing a lot of competition from larger companies because they largely ignore the Caribbean islands. But just scaling out a company is hard work. It's difficult. There's a huge cost to like building out customer support and making sure there's representatives in all the different jurisdictions that are trying to sell your software. And it just became really almost an impossible task without massive funding for us to build out these huge teams in all the different islands to roll out the software. And so at one point, we kind of made the decision to just focus in on a single island and just keep the lights on and make sure that our existing vendors are taken care of, but not try to scale out the business, because it was like the idea of going to get $10 million in funding and putting the business and our own livelihoods at risk seemed too tall of an order. And so we kind of conscientiously made that decision. And that was also the time where I was finding myself more and more interested in being a manager and a technical lead and building out a team and using my existing 25 years of experience to build really high effective teams. And Shopify gave me that opportunity to come on board and build out a team in an area that I felt comfortable with, that had prior experience, because largely the work that we were doing initially at Shopify kind of mirrored what we were doing at TripAdvisor, but do it more from a technical lead standpoint as opposed from an individual contributor. So it was a bit of a career pivot, if you will, just to move away from the day-to-day coding to being a team lead and a manager and leading a large team.
So I think this is interesting because what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a substantial amount of time in the lead up to, when you left TripAdvisor, you started I'll Help, and you had been thinking about doing your own thing, having your own business for a while. And it sounds like you started doing that, and something about the nature of that specific project led you to believe, okay, well, this is perhaps not the be all and end all for me. And it was difficult and arduous. And so you made a pivot, but you didn't shut down the company. You kept it alive and you found another way to keep it going. Tell us about that decision.
Well, I have partners in the companies, and so it's, there was a desire from their side to keep going and keep the lights on and keep fulfilling the contracts that we had established with our vendors. And so I was in full agreement with that, as long as they understood that I would be more in an advisory role and someone else would have to take the lead on developing new features and coding on a day-to-day basis, because I would be obviously very busy with Shopify. So that kind of led to that decision. But you touched on the whole transition part, which I think there's a part of me too that was like, shit, I'm 40 and I don't want to grind 150 hours a week building up a startup and putting my financial future at risk. And I think there was a part of me that was no longer interested in that chase. Whereas maybe in my early 20s, I would have been more apt for risk. Like, I mean, be open for risk, because I wouldn't have a family, wouldn't have a house, wouldn't have all these things that I need to take care of. So I think there was a part of me too, there's just like, I'm too old for this. Right. And that there was a big swath of my experience that wasn't being leveraged there, that I could leverage as a technical lead, as an engineering manager. And I felt more and more aligned with that career path than the day-to-day programming, which I'd been doing for, 25, 30 years.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of had goals and you reevaluated them in a fairly regular and ongoing way to say, okay, well, actually, I thought this is what I want for these reasons. Actually, at this stage of life, this other situation is better. So in this case, and it sounds obviously like you knew your skill set was valuable in the marketplace, which I think is important to mention, right? For someone else who perhaps doesn't have as lucrative skills, and experience, that might be more difficult. But so did you kind of decide to say, okay, I'm not going to do this full time anymore, and then go looking for a job, or did a job land in your lap? How did that transition back to Shopify work?
The job definitely landed in my lap. So a lot of my ex-colleagues, as well as my ex-boss, were currently at Shopify and had already reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested in joining Shopify? And I had initially declined. And part of it was because I was still trying to make the startup thing work. But also, I was kind of done with office life. And there's a part of me that was really enjoying working from home, during the 2.5 years I was doing the startup. And it just, I wanted to work. If I was going to go back to working for a large corporation, it would have to be remote. And at the time, this is pre-pandemic, so there's no idea of this remote life. And lo and behold, the pandemic hits. Shopify reverses its stance on office is, you need to be at the office. They go full remote, and it just seemed like a really good opportunity to just give it a go, give it a try. And it turned out to be a really fantastic decision, because like I've absolutely adored my time at Shopify so far. So it really did work out. The timing was fantastic.
That's really cool. So this was this kind of 2021? When did you join Shopify?
Yeah, I joined basically 5 months after or 6 months after the pandemic started. But as soon as the pandemic started, or actually a few months after the pandemic started, the CEO of Shopify made the announcement that they were going to be committing fully to remote. And that's when I called my contacts and said, okay, I'm interested in interviewing now. So
Great. And the offer was still on the table.
offer was still there. Yeah.
So it sounds like obviously you didn't tell them to F off when they, came and asked you if you wanted a job.
Of course not. No. I said, like, right now is not the right time, but let's keep talking, let's keep chatting. So there was probably 6 to 8 months between those two conversations. It happened really quickly. Again, obviously the pandemic just blindsided us. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a great lesson to kind of as we say often, don't burn your bridges, and be
No,
respectful and thankful for the opportunities. And also to carve yourself, a valuable skill set, which, who knows what that skill set will be in the future. You didn't know probably when you were 8 years old necessarily that this was totally the way of the future. You might have thought that it was going to be part of it, but you were just interested in it.
To be honest, when I was 8 years old, I thought I was going to be a game developer. I was going to build games. Obviously, I spoke about my kind of obsession with games back then. So that was my career path. But obviously, even at 15, 16, I saw that the web was going to be a bigger opportunity. And so I went down that path. And I think throughout my career too, I've sort of reevaluated what I care about, what excites me about work, where I want to spend my energy. The big pivot at 40, becoming a technical lead and an engineering manager, was a pretty big shift. Even though it's in the same industry, it's a completely different job, like completely different.
Going from doing coding to mostly overseeing a team of people and relating to them and helping them get their jobs done.
Yeah, it's a lot more product work. It's a lot more team building. It's a lot more collaborating with other parts of Shopify to make sure that all our roadmaps are aligned. And so I don't get as much opportunity to code. I still code. There is a requirement at Shopify that all engineering leads still code. And so I'm still pushing code every week. It's just that it's not the primary focus of my job anymore.
Okay, so one thing that I like about this is that, as you might not be surprised to know, oftentimes for young people that I meet, and they like gaming, and so their natural inclination is to say, "I want to be a game developer in my career." Or people I meet who enjoy sports, they'll say, "I want to be manage a sports team." So young people, rightfully so, will connect sometimes their current interests to something they want to do in a career. And it's really cool to hear your story, say, hey, I was really interested in gaming and coding, want to do gaming, eventually recognize that the skills that you develop through gaming and coding could be better used in these web-based technologies. So I really like that, because it's a reminder to young people to follow interests, but also to be aware that they don't know all the things that might be interesting to them yet, and to try in that area and see what emerges.
Yeah, the way I typically frame this is like you pull on different threads and you explore ideas and interests, and sometimes they're not fruitful and sometimes they're fruitful. I think that we overemphasize this idea of finding your passion and purpose early on in life, which I think is a dangerous idea. I think purpose and passion finds you based on your life path and sort of this meandering road that's unique to your life experience. And I think that it can change and evolve continuously. You may find that your purpose and passion is different at 30, at 40, at 50, at 60. Actually, there's overwhelming likelihood it will be. And to not be afraid or, nervous about the fact that you haven't figured it out at 17, 18, 19. In fact, most people simply don't, right? It's a lifelong journey. It will change. I could not compare myself at 40 to 20. Like, we're completely different people with different interests, different passions, different purposes. We're not entirely the same person.
And what's interesting here to me is that at the same time, there's this undercurrent for you, which is programming, technology, creating things, which has remained the same. But the way you see it, you're still very different than you were in terms of what you wanted a life when you were young.
Yeah, I think even in my idea of like how I view money, how I view titles, how I view career progression, how I view what truly makes me happy. When I was 20, getting a bump in salary or getting a new title made me exceptionally happy. Now it's building an effective team, right? Feeling like I'm part of the decision-making process at Shopify, that I'm influencing the shape and size of the org. These are the things that truly excite me and make me happy, not whether I got an incremental salary increase, right? So that's a pretty seismic shift in focus, just from my perspective.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to articulate the things that are specifically have changed for you. I appreciate that. And I would just add one thing. You mentioned, passion and purpose will find you. And the caveat I always like to add there, I agree with what you said. The important thing to note about you is that you did a lot of stuff in order for it to find you. So sometimes the idea, I think, that young people say, it'll find you, and all you have to do is kind of sit on your couch, which we definitely want
Yeah.
to break down. So you got to get out there and try stuff. And when you do, you'll eventually come into contact with those things.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned the pulling the threads, right? You really do have to explore interests and ideas and even be bold and go into areas that maybe at first glance don't seem super exciting or of interest. You may discover that, heck, there's something here that you do like. I think this goes back to also having just a really good work ethic. Like, go out there and work and do things and discover who you are as a person, right? This is a pretty long process, and it looks very different for everyone. And some people will figure it out in a couple of years. Some people will take a couple of decades, right? And I don't think you should be afraid with that unknown. I think it's actually kind of part of what makes life great, right? That this can change and pivot continuously.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, so we have a few minutes left here, and I'd love to chat about something that you've done quite a bit we haven't touched on yet. Two things, actually. First of all, I'd love to hear about travel. So you mentioned earlier you were living in Switzerland for a period of time. I know that you've also traveled to a number of other places.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us about your favorite place that you've ever traveled and why.
This changes as I travel. I think I went to Morocco when I was quite young, and I was just blown away by the different cultures and foods. They got the ocean, the sea, they got mountains, they got deserts, they got snow. Every landscape imaginable you can find in Morocco. And we went to the Sahara Desert. That was just such an incredible experience. Of course, you and I went to Tanzania. We climbed Kilimanjaro. We did the safari. That was a mind-blowing experience. More recently, my wife and I spent time in the Greek islands, and it is just a wonderful, wonderful area. It's so beautiful. Yeah, we want to go back. We had such an incredible time there.
Me too. That's one of my favorite places for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And what, given that you've traveled quite a bit, what's a lesson that you've learned through travel that you don't think you could have learned any other way?
I mean, I don't think you truly realize how similar people are at their core until you really travel into areas where they have different languages and religions and cultures, and you start to meet people and you just realize that on average people just are friendly folks. They want to show you what's beautiful about their country. They want to chat about sports, about work, about this social thing that they went to. There's so much similarities despite our differences, and I think that's an eye-opening experience. The other thing is, like, there's no substitution to being there in person. There's no Netflix show or documentary that you can watch that will truly show you the beauty of a country until you go there. And the other thing I want to say too is, I think it's easy to fall into the tourist traps when you go to a country. If you actually kind of avoid those things, I mean, you should do a couple of those, obviously, like go to the top of the Eiffel Tower, or else people are going to be like, what the heck did you do in Paris? But spending time with the locals and just kind of being part of the ebbs and flow of the city or the country can really show you something that the average person may not see if they're just falling into like the tourist traps and going into the main things. And I think that's when you really discover the beauty of countries. And so that's kind of my favorite thing to do when I visit a country. It's like, let's save the tourist stuff for the end, but let's see what the actual country is like and who the people are here.
Yeah, agreed. Like getting to know the 14 people who helped us carry our bags up Mount Kilimanjaro, which was eye-opening and humbling in many ways, certainly.
They were amazing. They were absolutely amazing.
Indeed. Okay, last question here. We like to always wrap up with the same question. These are called good life conversations, and part of the reason is that a lot of times young people get the message that a good life relates largely to the job that you have. And we in fact know that it's much beyond, much greater than that. It's, the work that we do, the purpose that we extract from it, the relationships that we have, the things we do outside of work for fun and meaning,
Hmm.
the adventures we have. So in a world where now young people often look online and they see very confusing and sometimes mixed messages about what they should be doing to create a good life for themselves. What advice would you offer for our audience to create a good life?
Well, a good life is a healthy balance of many things, and I think the composition looks slightly different from person to person. For me, a good life is a balance of your purpose and your passion, your work. It's the relationships you build over the years and kind of the network of friends. Obviously, the partner you spend time with is pretty critical to happiness, and so I think, and then health and exercise in whatever form, shape or form, I think is really important. When looking at folks that are earlier in their journey, I think you have to go out there and explore the world and figure out, what makes sense for you. And so try different things, try different jobs, pursue different interests. I think this is a very critical moment in your life to try to really understand what you care about and what interests you. But to answer that question, I think that mix and balance changes as you get older, and especially if you start a family. I mean, that shifts everything 180 degrees instantly. So that I think also you touched on the whole failure thing. I think it's really important to get comfortable with failure. In fact, I think it's obviously essential for growth. And I'm sure all mentors are repeating this. It's just like, get really comfortable with failure. I'm still messing up, and I'm pretty good at my job. And so it's like, I have to be okay with it. I have to be able to extract and learn from my failures and move on, right? I think if you dwell too much on failure, you can fall into this precipitous, like, vicious cycle, and it's not good for your mental health, and it's not good for for just your general well-being. So, but having said that, it's okay to get mad. Like, you're going to be occasionally going to get pissed off and mad. That's okay. I think it's just the important part is moving on and accepting that you messed up.
Yeah, working to reduce the amount of time that you have kind of emotional distress when a failure happens. I think over the course of a lifetime, just shaving that amount of time down further and
Mm-hmm.
further is a good piece of advice for sure.
Definitely.
Thanks, Kris. This has been great. I will let you go, but I appreciate your time, and I'm sure the students will have really interesting questions for you when you meet them. So thanks for doing this.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening, everybody. This has been another Good Life Conversation. We hope to see you at the next one.